Hey, my name's Clayton, and I recently finished a year-long road trip living out of my Tesla. I thought to make a video of all the things I wish I had known beforehand. The video got a little long, so feel free to use the links below to jump to a section that interests you. Enjoy. So I should give a shout out to my unofficial and unknowing sponsors. First of all, Tesla, thank you so much. Second, Anytime Fitness, you were amazing. And third, maybe Cracker Barrel, you were pretty great too. So I had been contemplating doing a trip like this for years. I love to travel, and I had been to a lot of the bigger cities in the US, but there are so many places in between. And for years, whenever I heard about a cool building, I'm an architect, or a cool place, I have dropped a pin on a map, on a Google map, and I just had these pins everywhere. I just thought, when am I ever going to be able to see all these in-between places? And I started doing some exploring, and when I learned about Teslas having free supercharging, that was one of the big sellers for me. You may be thinking that an electric car would not be ideal for a long road trip, and in some ways you're right, but Tesla has three things that were awesome on a long road trip. So first of all, this is an older Tesla that has free supercharging. Now, they did that until about early 2017, and second, this Tesla has the cameras necessary for full self-driving. Now, it's not full self-driving yet, but Autopilot is pretty amazing, and it makes driving so much easier. They introduced those cameras in late 2016, and so there was just a several-month period where you could get both of those features, and so I was specifically targeting that when I was looking for a Tesla. And then the third reason, if you're sleeping in your car, it's awesome being an electric car because you can just leave the air on all night. So whether it's cooling it or heating it, it was just nice, pleasant temperature inside. And I was finding that that usually used about 10 to 15% of the battery overnight, which for me was totally manageable. So you've probably heard of van life as it's becoming pretty popular. I felt that being in a sedan stood out a lot less, and I felt that I was able to park in a lot of places that I would look more suspicious in a van. And so I saw that as a big advantage to opening up places where I could park. Now, it didn't go as smoothly as I thought. One thing I didn't realize was that when you have the air on, the default is to have the AC on regardless of whether it's heating or cooling. That is actually fairly noisy from the street. And so if you're in a really quiet neighborhood and there's a sidewalk right by your car, you can pretty easily hear the AC on. And so I found that if I was in heating mode only, so the colder part of my trip, which was probably at least half my trip, I could just manually in the car turn off AC, and then the car is like totally silent outside. Now, it doesn't work if you're in like a really humid place, like say by the ocean. But for a lot of my trip, I found that if I just did that, then I felt like I was really stealthy. And then another benefit was that rather than using the like 10 to 15% of batteries that it normally used overnight, it would only use like 3%. So that was pretty nice. And maybe a little more if it were super cold. So I had been contemplating a trip like this for a while, and I knew that I wanted to follow the seasons because I was planning for it to be a whole year. And so essentially, I ended up going straight up to Canada where I'd never been. I went to Vancouver, Victoria, and I spent the month of September driving across Canada. And then I came down the East Coast during the fall, and that was beautiful. It happened to be a really long fall, which was lovely. Then during the winter, kind of arrived in Florida, and I kind of made my way from Florida along the Gulf Coast, Texas, Arizona. And I had been under the impression that the South doesn't really have winter, but I did not find that to be true. There were plenty of really cold nights, but it was not a huge issue. And then the springtime started making my way up the middle of the US, kind of towards the east, till I got to the north. Summer, it's hard to find anywhere that's great weather in the summer. I was kind of at the north of the country and then headed down the west coast. And that worked super well. So Tesla has 4 current models. This is the Model S, which was the first to be released. And only the Model S and Model X were built during the period where you had the real free supercharging. There were some promotions and there were some variations on the free supercharging, but the really good free supercharging ended in early 2017. So that made those 2 really good contenders for me. The Model X, I didn't love, so that's the one with the doors that go up. I didn't love that those kind of go up slowly and it's like, here's my car, look what's inside. So that wasn't super appealing to me. It's a tiny bit less efficient, so it doesn't go quite as far. The 5-seater model, though, does have a nice flat floor, so that would have been nice. The Model S, it does not quite have a flat floor, and so you'll see that I took out a seat back to make it more flat. But in my opinion, it has always been the best looking of them. Now, because mine is an older one, it does not supercharge as fast as the new cars. So that would have been really nice in a lot of scenarios. Also, the range is not as far as some of the new cars. My range is around 220, 250 miles, whereas some of the new cars are up to 400, which that would have helped a ton in a lot of scenarios, but I wouldn't want to put a new car through what I put my car through. The Model 3 is a decent option to sleep in, but you do kind of have your legs going through the seat back into the trunk, and it's a little bit tight. The Model Y, I think would have been a great option. The seats fold really nice and flat. It's pretty spacious, has normal doors. But the main thing for me was that it was very new at the time, and there were definitely very few deals. People just weren't selling those yet. Whereas the Model S, I mean, it's been around for a long time, and you can get some of them significantly cheaper, especially if you're willing to go before the Autopilot cameras were introduced. So the older cars, they just have highway autopilot, I think starting in 2014. And that probably would have been great for a lot of scenarios. What you would be lacking is the ability for the car to navigate freeway interchanges, which when you're going in places where you've never been before, it can be really nice if the car just knows which lane to get you in. So that was super helpful on my trip. Another nice thing about having the cameras is that there's a thing called Sentry mode, where when your car is locked, it'll use the cameras to watch for someone who's trying to break into your car or vandalize your car. I really appreciated that being on at night when I was sleeping, just to feel like I would hear something if someone was getting too close to my car, and it might kind of keep people away. Another kind of slick thing is that your car is always recording through all the cameras. And so if there's ever an accident near you or you're in an accident, you can give people the footage. That can be helpful, and I used that a couple times on my trip. One thing that's not great about the Model S is that while it looks cool, it's really low to the ground. And mine is not one of the ones that have the adaptive air suspension where you can raise it a little bit. So I only have one level and it's low. And there were quite a few places, more camping, outdoorsy parts of my trip, where I would get onto a road and realize, like, those ruts are deeper than my ground clearance and I cannot go there. But my car does have all-wheel drive, and I feel like it's a great system. So I didn't worry too much about traction. So obviously in a sedan, you're lacking a lot of things that you might have if you're doing it in a van. You don't have a kitchen, you don't have a bathroom. So the way that I dealt with those was primarily a membership to Anytime Fitness. Pretty much every morning I showered at Anytime Fitness. So I would go there, work out, and then they have private bathrooms, and it was really amazing. They have locations very widespread. It was occasionally a stretch to get to one easily, but usually it worked out pretty well. And obviously I was sitting a lot while driving my car, so it was good to get a workout in every morning. So it's kind of disappointing how difficult it is to find places to legally sleep at night. Almost every business parking lot you're not allowed, and it's become pretty common, I think, with the introduction of van life, to have signs that say no overnight parking. I personally think it's kind of silly, but I'm not sure exactly who they're targeting. Other than the very few legal places that I found to park at night, my favorite was probably Cracker Barrel. So if you're not familiar, they usually have several RV stalls in their parking lots, and they just allow people to sleep there overnight, which is really kind. And I think a lot of those people end up eating breakfast there in the morning, which might benefit them too. but that did tend to feel like a safe place to sleep at night. They tend to be well lit, which is good for safety, but can be a little bit annoying for sleeping. But that's common of most parking lots. Another decent option for sleeping at night is Walmart parking lots. A lot of them allow it, but there are a decent number that don't, and it can be kind of confusing to know which do and which don't. And then being a more stealthy vehicle, I found that often I would just go to a motel or hotel parking lot. And during the summer months when I needed to have my AC on, I was uncomfortable with that being a little bit noisy. And so I would usually drive around the property with my windows down and just listen for an air vent that would be making some noise and try to park near one of those because that masked it super well. There were a few places along the coast with gorgeous views that did allow parking, and those were very rare and they felt very special to me. Now, my trip being primarily about architecture, I was usually in cities, but for people who are more into nature, maybe you're near BLM land, which is also a decent option for sleeping legally. I only encountered those a few times that happened to be along my path. So I, of course, bought my car used. The previous owner had tinted the windows, actually beyond what was legal, but that was never really a problem for me. So the front window is tinted at 50%, which I think is not legal in most places. The front windows are tinted 20%, which I came to love, especially like while you're sitting at a supercharger, just when you have someone right next to you to not be able to feel like they're watching you. That was just nice having some privacy. And then the rear window and the rear passenger windows are all tinted at 5%, which is really dark. And during the day, like, you cannot see anything back there. At night, you cannot see anything back there unless there's a light source inside the car. So if you turn on your phone inside the car at night, it's super easy to see, even though the windows are tinted that dark. Fortunately, I'm not much of a foodie, so I'm pretty content just going to any fast food restaurant and ordering a deal off their app. So I pretty frequently ate for $5 to $7. I know that that wouldn't fly for some people. Every morning I made breakfast in my car, but the other 2 meals I was just eating out, so I didn't have any need for a kitchen. I did look at getting a 12-volt mini fridge, but it became too stressful figuring out how to keep it powered all the time, because when the car is off, it does not keep power to the USB ports or the 12 volt. And that was actually a little bit problematic at night because I was wanting to charge my devices. And so I ended up having to get a power bank that kind of served as an intermediary. So it would charge during the day, and then I would charge my devices off that at night, which I didn't have a lot of devices. I had an iPad, an iPhone, and a watch. So I had seen a video on YouTube talking about keeping your car vanilla, and the idea was that you just do not want to be drawing any extra attention to your car. So they were saying avoid bumper stickers and anything that would make it look unusual. And so my theory in being stealth at night particularly was that I designed a curtain that blocked the back, and my thought was that if someone was feeling uncomfortable about my car, they might walk up to it, look in the front window, and see that it's just an empty car and ignore it. So I didn't consider getting shades in the front windshield or windows. Now, I had mulled over getting them in the rear, and maybe I should have. There were definitely times where the light was coming in, and that was pretty annoying at night. I think I also should have just gotten used to sleeping with a mask. I had one that was pretty good for a while, and I lost it, and then all the ones I was finding were these thick foam ones that were really obnoxious for me at night. So I tended to not wear it unless I really had to. And I was often using my towels to block like a really bright light, and then just ignoring more general lighting. So a lot of van life people are couples, and that can be nice to have someone with you. I would not want to have a second person in here. It would be way too tight in my opinion. But my trip was very fast and focused on seeing things very constantly. So to be honest, I wasn't usually getting lonely and bored. I did find that in the evenings, especially during the winter when it got dark early, that I had to be intentional about calling friends and family. And that was a decent way of not being too lonely. So after thinking this through for a while, I finally presented the idea to my work as a 1-year sabbatical. And I'm sure they didn't like the idea, but they did allow me to do it. And so I was not working on this trip. I was full-time seeing stuff. I kept myself very busy doing that because I had so many things that I was intending to see. So let's look inside and I'll show you my setup. So because I was often trying to be stealthy at night, I left in this rear seat so that I could just jump in and sit here, close the door, and then get ready for bed. So under my mattress, there is a little bit of storage. So this is my gym bag that I took every morning. So I'd put my clothes in there and then go work out and shower. And then when I came back, I would always take my wet towel and then put it over the seat rest to dry off. So here's the back. When I crossed the border back into the US, the guy asked me to open up the back, and he looked and he was like, "You just sleep back here." I was like, yeah, it's fine. So in the back, I have my clothes, which I try to keep pretty organized. And then I have some socks, and this is usually where I keep my iPad. The bed's really quite comfortable. Over here, there's a little handhold where I would keep a mask and some earplugs and some chapstick. Now right here, there was a sturdy steel piece that received the seat back, and I kind of jimmy rigged this Apple Watch charger, but it was really nice just being able to charge my watch there at night. And if I ever wanted to know the time, I could just tap it. The cable just goes down below and it connects into a battery. So in the back, there is an underfloor storage compartment. And some things that I keep in here, I have this chair that I use all the time. It's pretty slick. Have a blanket that I occasionally used at parks. Also a blanket. This one's really warm for the winter parts of my trip. I have a backpack that I used to fly home once and for a couple short flights. Another just backpack for maybe day at the beach. First aid kit, a hammock that I wished I had used more. Some tools. I have a dry sack that I used at the beach sometimes. Have a day bag that I used constantly in cities. Another bag that I have some swimsuits and towels, beach stuff in. Have my mobile Tesla charger, which I didn't use as much as I was expecting I might. Occasionally I'd find like a free RV park or something where I could plug into a 50 amp. And then just a rain jacket. And then on this side, there's another side compartment. I have my laundry bag. And then some shoes that I used for the beach or hiking occasionally. So one nice thing about an electric car is that because there's no motor, you have storage space in the front. So up here, I tried to always have some spare meals just in case. I had water. I had this sleep sack that I used whenever I was staying at a friend's house, which was not too often, but occasionally. Some medicine, some extra toiletries. These were the milks that I used every morning. Some snacks, some sodas. Then I have some laundry items. Have some stuff to clean my car, which I did not use that frequently. I should have done more. Some extra hand sanitizer, bug spray. Now, the front trunk, I found that during much of my trip, it was actually quite cool in here, particularly because of the night. And so during the day, I could just come in here and grab a soda, and they were usually pretty cool. Now, at the end of my trip, when it was summer, that was definitely not the case. But I found that if I stuck them on the air vent right behind my elbow, they would get cool in about 30 minutes, and it was pretty decent. So up in the front, I have the passenger seat set, really prioritizing space in the back. But I have, hat, jacket, I use this quite a bit. It's just a 12-volt little heater to reheat food. This is a little tray for the steering wheel. I use that quite a bit. I rarely used this Yeti cooler. I thought I was going to use it a bunch, but it just never seemed worth having ice. Every morning I would make a bowl of cereal, and I would rotate what brand it was each week, and then I just have a bag full of snacks. And then my cereal each morning would go into a solo cup. I got my spoons. So to use the tray, you need the steering wheel to be upside down, and then you just clip this on the bottom, and it works pretty well. Now, if you didn't think to put the steering wheel upside down before the car turned off and locked it, you can go into the beach buggy racing game, and that will loosen it up temporarily. And then to open the glove box, there's a button. It's a little bit strange. And in there, I tended to keep a headlamp, the national parks passes, gift cards, and registration. I also quite liked this ring light, which I would use for conversations when I was talking with friends in the evening in the dark. And then down here, I found that it was a handy place to have some hand sanitizer, my sunglasses, and a mask. There is also this storage compartment, and I have an organizer. This does not come with the car, and then below it goes fairly deep. So I also frequently use this adapter that allows you to charge at level 2 stations. So every night I would put the temperature on keep, and then up here I had a profile saved called camp that would essentially put my driver's seat forward so that I had a little bit extra room in the back. So every night I would sit here and take off my shoes and get undressed, and then just get into bed. And occasionally I was watching movies in the evening, and I found that there was a really easy place to put my iPad. And this was just pure luck. But I would just place it right here. And I found that that was like the perfect spot to be watching a movie. Now, something that I had not anticipated was that this vent that serves the rear really does not do that much of the air, maybe 25%. So almost all the air, conditioned air, is coming out in the front. And that makes it so that the back does not heat or cool that well. So that was a downside. I still think it was worth having the privacy, but I wished that had worked out better. I tended to find that in the winter, my feet towards the back were getting no air, and I just needed a blanket. So this is the interface in an older Model S. I really like that you have the main screen and then a huge map. And it was pretty slick because on the left, it would show me my navigation, what I needed to do immediately. But on the right, I could see my context. And sometimes if I was driving for hours and hours, I would occasionally just wonder like, wait, what state am I in? And so I could just zoom out and figure out where I was. And then if you press here, it'll show you all the nearby superchargers. So if you're planning a really long trip, it will tell you all the places that you need to charge and for how long. So for example, each station will show you what percent you'll arrive at and then how long you need to charge there. And then you just keep going on. Now, I was rarely doing a trip this long. On average, I was traveling about 200 miles per day. But on an occasional long stretch, it's really nice that the interface will do this for you. So if you click on the temperature, it'll bring up a menu, and down here you have some different modes. And surprisingly, camp mode I did not find very useful. It does a few things that I dislike. One is that it turns off the security system for the night, and I really liked having that on. And then second, it turns off the feature where your car locks when you walk away with the key. Now, I did not have much use for dog mode, but that is another mode. The one that I used was keep, and it essentially only leaves the air on. Otherwise, the car is as if it shut down. So both of these screens will turn off once it's locked when you're in that mode. I felt surprisingly safe in my car. It was kind of weird at moments hearing people walking around or talking. I think I partly got used to it. I thought I might use earplugs, but I don't think I really did. I found that it was worth putting a little bit of thought into where you were parking for the night. I would try to find somewhere flat and with not super bright lights shining right into the rear windows. There was one night where I parked unknowingly under a walnut tree, and about every 20 minutes one would drop on my car and freak me out. So during the trip, it was really fun meeting up with some old coworkers and old friends, old classmates, and I stayed with some of them, and it was nice to occasionally not be in my bed. So about 3/4 of the way through my trip, I had a really awkward experience where I was pulling off the road, just looking for a spot to park right between two parking lots. There was a little mud patch, and I drove right onto a little concrete. I think it used to be a bollard that was like bent over. And I barely pulled onto it, and it stopped my car, and I immediately reversed, and I could see that there was dripping fluid, and I knew that was not good. I was praying that it would be windshield washer fluid, which it was not. My car very quickly told me coolant low. Tesla says you should absolutely not drive your car with low coolant because it had pretty much drained the system. So essentially, I cracked the front radiator that's right at the front of the car, and I had to get towed to a service center. Now, the service center looked at it and they said that there are bent parts, and so they don't deal with that. And so there's a whole network of Tesla approved body shops. And I called the two that were in that area. The first one just said like, oh, we could probably look at your car in about 6 weeks. The other one kind of took pity on me because I was on a road trip. And yet in the end, there kept being delays, partly just because they were working on like 70 other Teslas. But it was really painful. So I wasn't sure how long it was going to be. So I did a few flying trips. I flew to New York and Chicago, just places where I knew that I didn't need a car. But as the trip got longer, I ended up renting a Prius. And it was a horrible experience, but it was kind of good to compare. And it showed me how well my car had been working. It made me appreciate it more. So some of the things that were not near as nice in the Prius were that it's significantly smaller. And so I just felt so crammed. And then in addition, because it was a rental, the windows were not tinted at all. And so I just felt totally on display. And so during those, what became 8 weeks, I tried to almost always sleep somewhere where I felt fairly legal, like a Cracker Barrel. I was very uncomfortable being on display in other places. Now, it was kind of interesting being in the Prius. It was really convenient being able to just go to a gas station and get 550 miles of range in 5 minutes. That made me kind of jealous. And I found that during those weeks, I wasn't thinking about my range near as much as otherwise during my trip. But it was also painful paying for all the gas. Fortunately, the Prius gets decent gas mileage. I was really pleasantly surprised to find that the Prius had pretty good adaptive cruise and lane keeping. And so for the boring drives, it kind of did a lot of the work for you, which I was very used to in my Tesla, and my Tesla did it better, but it was still great to have. I was fortunate that I had an old coworker in that city, and I left about half my gear at his place so that I could fit the rest crammed into the Prius, and it still felt really tight. I realized that Teslas have a lot of storage space, which is great for a trip like this. I was curious how many tires I was going to go through on my trip. I replaced them about 3 months in, and then the next ones lasted me the rest of the trip. So I felt like that was pretty good. I also feared that I was going to go through a handful of windshields, and amazingly, I did not get single rock chip. So I think I was just really lucky. So because supercharging charges your car so fast compared to, say, charging at home, it's supposed to be fairly hard on your battery. So some people really avoid it. I just ended up embracing it. Now, when my car was sold, it was advertised to have a range of 259 miles, EPA estimate. Now, when I bought it 5 years later, I was showing an average of maybe 235 miles of range. And note that it's very fluid. It depends on a lot of factors. But by the end of my trip, it was showing about 230 miles average, so it dropped maybe a couple percent. And I found that totally worth it. One pretty awkward experience that I had with charging was I went to Death Valley, where it was 120 something degrees, so you really needed your AC. And I needed to charge there for the night, and I had planned on that, and I actually checked the charger on my way in, and it was working. I went into the park, and then on my way out, I went back and plugged in, and there was no power. And I went into the front desk just to say, like, do I need to get a switch flipped on or something? And their lights were off, and I discovered that the whole region had no power, which for an electric car is pretty terrible. Now, stuff like that happens for gas cars too. Sometimes if a station doesn't have electricity, they also can't pump gas, but it was pretty annoying. So I ended up having to stay there all night and start charging at 5 a.m. And I was there a lot of the next day. It was pretty awkward. So in the Model S, if you remove the back seat, there's a nearly flat floor. And it's a little bit involved. It involves taking up this piece, and the only reason for that is because you need to undo a bolt below with the middle seat belt, and it's a special shape. And then it's a little bit weird. This piece remains, and so that was actually why I knew that I needed to do the mattress on this side of the car. And it's in this seat back that has the pin that holds this in. So I just got a bolt to temporarily hold that. I wouldn't trust that that's entirely safe, but I was never having a passenger back here while driving, so it didn't bother me too much. Okay, now there's a bit of a dip here, and so I purchased a piece of wood and doubled it up at the end, just so it would be about the right height, and then I wrapped it in auto carpet. And then that fits in there fairly nicely, and I was intentional about how close I was getting to the seat back, because I figured that this part of the mattress didn't need to be supported, but I wanted to have a little bit of play with the seat back. And so that creates a nearly flat floor. If I were doing this again, I think that I would have made this piece be longer and overlap more, because there's a very slight dip here that I was noticing, and it bothered me. So I bought a 5-inch foam mattress off Amazon, and I took an electric carving knife and I trimmed out the side for the wheel well, and then also a little bit at the very top for the air vents to be less obstructed. And it's quite flat and quite comfortable. Now, something that I designed that I have mixed feelings on was this curtain, and in it I have placed metal washers. And then previous to my trip, I installed magnets occasionally behind the felt. And I didn't want it to be anything that was visually permanent. So that was why I glued them on behind. So essentially every night I would get in, and then these just snap onto those magnets. And I found that really visually separated the front, so that someone could go look at the front during the night, and I felt pretty private back here. It also blocked lights, so sometimes there were some really bright lights out front, but this kind of kept it darker back here. So once I got going on the trip, I found that one of the neatest sensations was just feeling that I was totally self-contained, and I could stop anywhere for the night, and I could go anywhere during the day. That was just amazing. By the end of my trip, I had traveled 70,000 miles in 48 states, and I must say we have an amazing country. It was so cool seeing new cities that I'd never been to, lots of national parks, and just all the in-between places. I really appreciate you watching. Thanks for sticking till the end. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Thanks. Bye.